Thank you very much, Dan, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all of our participants. I see we have about 50 participants online, so it's very encouraging, and thank you all for taking the time to join us this afternoon. There may be some of you who already know me. My name is Yvonne Ewang. I am one of the legal officers within the Secretariat. What I will do is just switch on my camera for a couple of minutes so that I can, there we go, just to put a face to a name. And then for the purposes of saving the broadband as we go along, I will switch off my camera, but I'll be accompanying you throughout the next hour or so. So turning to our topics for this afternoon, Geneva time at least, we are in the second of, it's the second webinar in this series, and we have a series of 3 different topics that we're talking about, all surrounding the issue of the plastic waste amendments. Maybe just to dive in, these were amendments that were adopted in May last year. There may have been some of you who participated in the meeting of the Conference of the Parties where the amendments were adopted. And we're looking towards the entries, the new entries, taking effect from the 1st of January next year. So the intention from the Secretariat side would be to support the parties as we go forwards, so that you are prepared for when we arrive at the 1st of January, and action that needs to be taken is taken before that date. So implementation can already begin from the 1st of January 2021, rather than having to take action retrospectively. As I mentioned, this is the second webinar, but the first topic that we'll be covering on legal and institutional steps for implementation of the plastic waste amendments. There will also be 2 webinars for each of the other topics, looking firstly at technical aspects, and that includes related to the technical guidelines on plastic waste, and on enforcement aspects. The technical aspects will take place on the 7th and 8th of September, and the link to register for that series of webinars is already online, so you can already look forward to participating in those webinars. The enforcement aspects webinars will take place at the end of September. The dates are still to be determined, so please keep an eye on the webinar page of the website, and as soon as those dates are confirmed, we will put them online for you, and you can register. So the thinking being that parties would usually go through the first step of looking at what's the legal and institutional basis for implementing the convention, including these amendments. Then you'd be looking at implementation-related elements, so that could be technical aspects such as identification of waste, etc. And then you would need to also focus on making sure that your enforcement authorities have the right tools and that you've covered those aspects, so that you can then enforce what you've put in place as your legal basis, as your institutional basis. So that is the thinking behind these sets of webinars. Looking at what are the plastic waste amendments, some of you may again be particularly familiar with this, and so it will just be a very quick refresher. Others may be new in this area, so it's to give a little bit of a basis and get us all started off on the same footing. The aim of the amendments when they were adopted was parties wanted to enhance the control system that's put in place by the Convention for transboundary movements of plastic waste, and clarify which types of plastic waste fall within the scope of the convention. So in essence, there are three sets of changes that were made to three of the annexes to the convention. The first one is the insertion of a new entry in Annex II, which covers other wastes. So you may know the convention separates the types of waste falling in its scope as hazardous or other. So the addition of a new entry Y48 covers plastic waste, including mixtures, unless these are hazardous. If they are hazardous, then they would fall under the second new entry, which is A3210, and that is contained within Annex 8. And the Annex 8 entries of waste are presumed hazardous unless you use the hazard characteristics in Annex 3 to demonstrate that the waste is not hazardous. The third set of amendments or changes to the convention that was made was a new entry B3011, which from the 1st of January 2021 will replace an existing entry. So there is already an entry B3010, but that will, for those who have agreed to be bound by these amendments, that will only be in place until the 31st of December 2020. From the 1st of January 2021, it will be replaced by B3011, which clarifies the types of plastic waste that are presumed to not be hazardous, and so they would not be subject to the control procedure under the convention. And these wastes would include, for example, cured resins, there's a group of those, non-halogenated and fluorinated polymers, provided that the waste is destined for recycling in an environmentally sound manner. So looking at one of the pillars of the Basel Convention in ensuring environmentally sound management of waste, and that those wastes are almost free from contamination and other types of waste. The new entry B3011 also includes mixtures of plastic waste consisting of polyethylene, polypropylene, or PET, provided that they're destined for separate recycling of each material, and again in an environmentally sound manner, and almost free from contamination and other types of waste. There have already been a set of frequently asked questions that are available on the convention website. I would add as well here that the presentation will be made available to you at the end of the webinar. So please don't worry, you will have easy access to the URL address you see on the screen in front of you. Looking then to what is available to help you as you go forwards, there are various different tools and guidance that already exist. These exist relating to the convention as a whole, but they do they are applicable and they are relevant when you're looking at the plastic waste amendments as well. So you have, looking at the topic of our discussion today, when it comes to legal and institutional aspects, you have two tools that are listed in the first two bullets that are particularly relevant in that respect. So you have, for example, the manual for the implementation of the Basel Convention, which includes a checklist for the legislator. And the idea with that checklist being that you could put a text of national legislation side by side with the checklist, and then match the provisions of your legislation with what is within the checklist. There is also a guide for the development of national legal frameworks to implement the convention, and that is quite a detailed document that goes through not only preparations for drafting national legislation and other measures, but the role of different actors in the drafting process, drafting, implementing legislation, and that includes elements related to the illegal traffic aspects, enforcement, information exchange, as well as how to ensure effective implementation and enforcement. So it is quite an holistic document. And then in terms of tools that are also available, you would also have things related more to implementation, or once you have that base in place. So the guide to the control system is not just aimed at lawyers, but also aimed at those who would be involved in transboundary movements of waste as a whole. So it's more of a, let's say, a user's guide for all the stakeholders. And then if you're looking more at, for example, customs officers, enforcement officers, prosecutors, there is specific guidance for them as well. So again, there's a website page with plenty more information, many more tools to help you as you go forward. I would certainly say that that is a good resource to look at between now and January to make sure that any steps that are needed are taken enough in advance. So what steps do need to be taken? There are obligations under the Convention on each of the parties to take appropriate legal, administrative, and other measures to implement and enforce the Convention. And that is the Convention as a whole, so including the plastic waste amendments. One thing we would say, and we continue to repeat, is that the control procedure is actually unchanged by these amendments. The idea is to clarify the scope of plastic waste, what falls under the Convention or not. But that doesn't change the requirement for waste coming under the Convention that you would have to notify, receive consent, issue the movement document, have the transboundary movement, and then confirm the environmentally sound management of the waste once that movement has taken place. So this is why when we refer to the Convention, those amendments are an integral part of the Convention. And so the materials and the support available to you in relation to the Convention would also help you when it comes to looking at any changes that would be needed in relation to the plastic waste amendments. This also, the good news is that this also means that there may be measures that have already been implemented that could be relevant and in some cases maybe even sufficient to already implement the plastic waste amendments. We have various different texts of national legislation within our collection that's online. And from there, you can see examples of both generic measures that have been taken and specific measures. So that's a useful resource to see exactly what parties have done so far. There is also a lot of work that's been undertaken by the Implementation and Compliance Committee in particular in relation to national legislation. So just to give an example, what we were referring to previously on the slide before with the Guide for the Development of National Legal Frameworks, that came out of a guide that was developed by the Compliance Committee and then adopted by the Conference of the Parties. So there is a whole body of work that continues to be done as well, and that is there to support parties when it comes to implementation of the plastic waste amendments. So what concretely does this mean? How do we go forwards? A good starting point would be to look at if there are any existing measures within the country to transpose, so to take the Basel Convention and to bring it into the national legal framework. Here, we strongly advise a good collaboration with those who are responsible for putting in place the legal framework within your country. So it may well be that you are already within that entity. It may be that you have to work with colleagues. You may be contributing as a stakeholder to a national process. There are various different ways you could be involved in that, but it's important to bring in these different experts at your national level. And of course, there are different traditions in different countries. In some of your countries, it may well be that there's already a direct application of the convention and the amendments. In others, there may not be this self-executing possibility, and you need to have an implementing measure to transpose what is within the convention and the amendments into your national law. So that's an analysis that is important to make at the earliest opportunity, so that you then have enough time, if there is action that needs to be taken to give effect to the obligations, you have enough time to do the steps and enact whatever legislation measure is needed. Again, to highlight, there may be adequate implementing legislation already. We as a Secretariat and within the wider international community, there is assistance available to support parties in this respect. And the idea being that in that way, you would highlight what's important within the national legal and institutional framework to have full implementation. And again, the intention from the Secretariat side would be to provide you with that assistance early on, so that when we get to January, we have as many parties as possible, if not all parties, already implementing the plastic waste amendments. And that is our objective at the moment, looking towards this effective date. But also by having that support for you at the international level, it does provide that there is some support and some joint action, so that there's a consistency, so there's a common understanding and exchange of information and experiences. So hopefully at the end of the road, we would all have a common understanding, or you as the parties would have a common understanding of what this entails and how each of the parties is implementing. The elements that could be needed, again, to highlight this early analysis of what exactly exists at the national level. And it could also be it could be national, but it could also be a regional approach. Some countries do have a coordination mechanism at the regional level when it comes to measures to implement the convention. So by analyzing what already exists, you would know if there are any gaps or needs, and you can identify any challenges and opportunities. We as the Secretariat would be very happy to hear from you, both in terms of the gaps and needs and the challenges and opportunities. This would also then help us to guide any future work, but also to inform partners of where there could be a need to address in future cooperation. So please feel free to liaise with the Secretariat when it comes to the points you may discover in doing that analysis. In doing so, you may also find that you wish to change the approach that your country has taken. So, for example, some countries have relied on a framework environmental law and then use secondary regulations. It may well be that in doing the analysis, they identify that it would be preferable to have a specific piece of legislation on wastes, on hazardous wastes, on plastic wastes. That's all part of the analysis that should be done to see if there is a desire or a need in that respect. And of course, in doing so, you have these tools and guidance that are available to you. And there could also be other tools at the regional level. So there could be some regional centres who have developed specific tools that could be of assistance to you, or there could be an adaptation of what's been developed at the international level. So it's important to find out what is there to support you in those efforts. And involvement of stakeholders. It may well be that this is a requirement within your national setup to have some kind of, for example, public consultation. And so it's important to find out what the steps would be at the national level, and to involve stakeholders. There is within, for example, the Guide for Development of National Legal Frameworks, there are elements that are included there as to how you can involve other stakeholders and at what stage. And that could be within different ministries, it could be public consultation, it could be consultation with civil society, with industry stakeholders. And again, that would depend on what your national tradition is. You could also look at if there's an opportunity to exchange experiences and information with other parties. So if you see that there is another party who is already further along the line in implementation, or who has adopted an approach that you might wish to take elements from, we do have as well a database of country contacts. So you could certainly get in contact with the competent authorities to receive further information and share the experiences in that respect. There are other considerations that could also come into play. So looking at what controls do we already have in place? Do they specifically relate to waste? Do they not? Are these sufficient? Is there anything else that's needed? And how could it be achieved? What would be the immediate goal? What would be a medium term and a longer term? So you could therefore take a stepwise approach in that respect. It's also very helpful from the experience we've learnt with other parties that you have clear mandates, roles and responsibilities set out for the different stakeholders that are involved. And that could involve also setting up or strengthening coordination mechanisms. There may be some already existing. There may be a need to set up a new mechanism or to adjust the mechanism to involve other stakeholders. And coordination could be something as simple as having an email exchange or having a WhatsApp group. It does not necessarily have to be a very formal setup. Again, that would be something to assess as you go forwards. And then one of the elements that will be covered in a lot more detail in our last series, our last set of webinars, will be enforcement. And so giving customs and other enforcement agents the information that they need, raising awareness about anything that has changed as a result of implementing the plastic waste amendments, putting them in touch with other stakeholders, sharing, for example, this presentation with them. There are various different ways that that could be done. It's also important to remember that we are looking to the effective date that is in the future. This is a relatively new action, and so there may be additional specific information related to these amendments and what parties are doing to implement that is available in the future, but that is not necessarily available right now. So to give an example, the Secretariat has been working with several parties on projects related to the plastic waste amendments, one of which is is located in Ghana, and there is information coming out of those projects already that could help with sharing information about how the amendments could be implemented. So I would say certainly to watch this space when it comes to the convention website to provide some further information and share what is going on as well. It's also an important element and probably something that has raised some questions for you when it comes to identification of the plastic waste, how to do so, how to build capacity for that. That will be looked at in a lot more detail in our next set of webinars. And there could already be information available from other parties, as well as at the international level. The Secretariat is, of course, available to support whatever efforts are going on, but there is also a lot more assistance that's available, for example, from the regional centres, from the Implementation and Compliance Committee. To give an example about that, they have within their current work programme a possibility to for parties to do a self-review of their legislation and then inform the compliance committee. So that information can then feed into the reports back to the Conference of the Parties. And there is the UNEP special program on strengthening legal and institutional frameworks that is also assisting parties in that respect. So there's a lot going on. This is a very dynamic topic and information is still being collected. So it's important to keep this kind of dialogue going and to move forward with the continuous exchange of information in that respect. So I will maybe just stop there, and I will allow a minute for Dan to take control of the presentation, and I will keep an eye open for any questions in the chat. But please also do feel free to raise your hand should you have any questions. Thank you.